One of the terrorists who reportedly come from the Fatah faction, Yasser Arafat's group, and reportedly captured the others. We're also being told now that one UN peacekeeper was killed in this incident. Other news this morning, back in this country, the TV evangelist Jimmy Swaggart, it was Judgment Day for him in New Orleans yesterday, and he didn't like the call. A jury found him guilty of spreading lies about a rival preacher, Marvin Gorman, and it's going to cost Swaggart a bundle. Reporter Bob Goldberger with ABC affiliate WBRZ has details.
New Orleans evangelist Marvin Gorman marched out of the courtroom a vindicated man. A 12-member jury decided Baton Rouge evangelist Jimmy Swaggart did defame Gorman and destroy Gorman's rival television ministry by spreading so-called lies about Gorman's sex life. Gorman says he could barely control himself when he heard the verdict.
It was all I could do. If my attorneys had not instructed me be quiet in the courtroom, I'd have been on my feet leading a Jericho march around that place.
Jurors also ruled Swaggart conspired with attorney Bill Treby to inflict intentional emotional pain on Gorman. They awarded Gorman and his ministry $10 million in damages.
The verdict by the jury was so obviously prejudiced that I've gone beyond shock.
All the jury has left to do now is decide how much of that $10 million Jimmy Swaggart has to pay, how much Jimmy Swaggart Ministries has to pay, and how much ministry attorney Bill Treby has to pay. Ironically, Reverend Gorman may walk away from all this with only a moral victory. If the judgment stands, his attorneys will get half of the money, and creditors for his bankrupt estate get the other $5 million. Gorman regains his reputation, but may not see a single red cent. In New Orleans, Bob Goldberger reporting for ABC News.
Now, Swaggart says he will appeal that decision, and you can hear more about why when he joins us shortly right here on Good Morning America. Finally, Senate Democrats have fired more than 70 questions on abortion at Judge Clarence Thomas. But who's counting? Well, the Republicans on the committee are. They say the Democrats are simply trying to break Judge Thomas on one issue, and they say enough is enough. Today is Judge Thomas's fourth day before the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it could be his last. Here's ABC's Tim O'Brien.
Not only did Thomas resist discussing his legal views on abortion, he put his personal feelings off limits too.
Whether or not I have one, I think is irrelevant to my being impartial or considering this issue as a judge.
Thomas's leading supporter on the committee criticized Democrats for dwelling on abortion.
What are we going to have, 64,000 questions on abortion before we're done with this approach? I mean, you'd think from listening to what's going on here that that's the only issue the Supreme Court has to decide.
But Thomas exasperated liberals on other issues too, like whether the constitutional right to privacy guarantees unmarried couples the right to use contraceptives.
For a judge to sit here without the benefit of arguments and briefs, etc., and without the benefit of precedent, I don't think anyone could decide that.
I think that is the most unartful dodge that I've heard, but let me go on.
And he did, in a testy exchange telling the nominee his theories about natural law rested on tortured logic. The committee then turned to Thomas's controversial record at the EEOC.
Why did it take almost 2 years before the commission discovered that it had a system-wide problem which was causing thousands of older workers to lose the chance to vindicate their rights?
If I could have investigated every single one of those age charges, I would have. That was the low point of my tenure. I said it then, and I say it now.
Thomas attributed the enormous backlog to inadequate resources, making it impossible to track pending cases. Senators finally are getting away from the abortion issue, and the nomination is still on track, although later today, liberal Democrats are expected to continue turning up the heat. Tim O'Brien, ABC News on Capitol Hill.
And that is the news till now. It's time to check in with Charlie and Spencer.
All right, thanks very much, Mike. It's coming up now on 8 minutes after the hour, and secretly block health and safety regulations in this country. In a just-released report, the watchdog groups claim that the Council on Competitiveness, which is headed by the Vice President, secretly uses political pressure to kill or change regulations that businesses don't like. The Vice President's office says the Council is just cutting through regulatory red tape to spur the economy and create more jobs. Joining us from Washington is Joan Claybrook. She's the president of Public Citizen, one of the groups making the charges. And also with us this morning is James Miller, a former director of the Office of Management and Budget and an informal unpaid consultant to the Council on Competitiveness. And I thank you both for being here. Joan Claybrook, start by telling me just what it is that you're charging.
Well, you know, late-night TV still makes jokes about Dan Quayle, but it's no joke what he's doing, influence peddling on behalf of big business secretly in the back corridors of the White House. There are really two issues. One is the secretiveness that he has imposed on the activities of his office, cutting citizens out of the process, encouraging business to come in and to undermine health and safety and environmental regulations that these government agencies, with all their scientists and expertise, have decided to impose. And secondly, actually what's happened, he's really taken the federal cop off the beat to prevent business crime and fraud and abuse. For example, the 25 people who were killed in the chicken processing plant in North Carolina recently, where there was no federal inspector, or the big banking fraud, the S&L bailout, which has torpedoed our economy. Those are examples of taking the federal cop off the beat. And Jim Miller, during his tenure in office, similarly added to pollution in America, the S&L crisis, and tens and thousands of additional deaths on the highway by opposing airbags in cars. So right, these are the implications for the public.
Let me take these to Jim Miller, who I'm sure will want to respond.
Right. I think my mother thinks more of me than that. Let me say that what is at stake is an enormous regulatory enterprise, 5.3 million billion man-hours. It's the equivalent of 2 million people in America operating full-time to fill out the red tape. You've got an army of regulators out there, and also today our economy is not recovering as it should, in part because of this enormous volume of regulation that has been added to the economy. Now, Ms. Claybrook says that this process where
some of our best sons in these wars, and if we can make some progress towards peace, that is Israel's primary interest.
Let me move to the hostage situation, if I might. This week saw Israel release 51 Arab detainees and repatriate the remains of 9 others. Do you view the return of the remains of one of your missing servicemen as a satisfactory response to that gesture?
Well, actually, the Samir Assad, the Israeli sergeant that was returned in the early hours of this morning, that was something that had been negotiated with the particular faction, the PLO, that had his body now for 8 years, quite separately from the UN Secretary General's efforts that are proceeding these very days. So the two are really not connected. Hopefully they'll lend some momentum to the ongoing process of getting everybody released, hostages, Israeli missing in action, and the prisoners.
In this country, it is widely believed that a final resolution of the crisis is gaining momentum, is moving forward. Do you share that view?
Well, we've seen, I would say, the first significant advance for many, many years. Now, whether the Secretary General will be able to bring this to completion, whether we will be able to see all our boys return, I can't tell you for certain. We certainly have put all our hopes on the Secretary General's mission.
What do you view as the next logical and or necessary step if the process is to be moved forward?
Firstly, that information is passed to us regarding the status, the condition, the location of Israeli prisoners that are being held by these terrorist organizations. Once that has occurred, I think we can go on to the next step of getting everybody released.
Defense Minister Moshe Ahrens, we thank you very much for being with us, sir. Thank you. We're coming up on 1:15. Katie's back in just a moment with a young man from Georgia with some strong opinions about his mentor, a man named Clarence Thomas. We'll get to that after a break.
Have to extract.
Well, the Syrians would like to be now, they want to be rehabilitated. And they also control the ruins of Beirut. And they can no longer claim, oh, well, we don't know what's going on in the southern slums. We don't know what's going on in West Beirut. They rule Lebanon by proxy. And so if the Syrians want to make a deal with President Bush, and if they want to be part of this new world order, they too have to play ball. And that's really what has altered this equation. And that's why one could be presumably optimistic. But remember, we've been conned and snookered before.
Can we expect the Israelis to make more concessions?
Well, I think the Israelis have made the concessions they could. Remember, the Israelis, this is a democratic government under a lot of pressure. It can't trade, it can't give away things unless it gets specific information on its 7 men missing in Lebanon, unless it gets its pilot back. So the Israelis too, in effect, have to get something out of this bargain. They won't just make a deal in order to make the life of the Americans and the Brits easy. They can't, because this is the nature of the political game.
Fawad Ajami, pleasure to see you again. Thanks for bringing your perspective to this morning. Harry?
It is 16 minutes past the hour. Much more ahead this morning.
That goes wrong in the regulatory area. Ms. Claybrook and her associates want to blame me or the vice president or the regulatory task force or the competitiveness task force. I raise the following question. Joan, given that the trial lawyers in the United States fund your organization so heavily,
they do not. They do not. That is a lie. That is a lie, Jim.
That
Jim,
1
you're funded
month
by
after
big
the
business.
vice president takes issue with excessive litigation in this country, you're out attacking him.
That is incorrect, and you're funded by big business, and you don't know what you're talking about.
I'm going to leave. I'm going to leave the questions of funding. I'm going to leave the questions of funding that stand. And the debate on this, obviously, is very hot for both of you. Thank you very much for being with us. 16 minutes after the hour. We move now to the